Hi, I'm Nick Patience. I'm the AI Platforms Practice Lead at Futurum Research, a technology industry analyst company. And I'm here today with Chintan Patel, the EMEA CTO for Cisco, and we're here to talk about our 2026 outlook. Hi, Chintan.
Hi, Nick. Great to be with you.
So let's just kick off by thinking about some practicalities. So we hear a lot about AI is going to change the world, but what I want to do is ground this a little bit more in some practical terms about how organizations can turn this kind of last few years of AI experimentation into actual business value.
Yeah, I think firstly, it's an exciting space to be in. I think there's a lot of opportunity for organizations, certainly this year, to really think about how they take all the experimentation, all of the pilots that they've done over the last couple of years really into production. I'd say one of the biggest constraints that organizations are seeing is really around the infrastructure. The infrastructure that probably most organizations upgraded around or slightly after the pandemic is possibly not fit for purpose for what they need to do from a mass scale perspective as it comes to agentic AI and deploying agents and AI at scale in their environment. And so this infrastructure constraint, both in terms of capacity, networking, the ability to scale these systems out quickly and securely, is probably one of the things that's hindering organizations. And coupled with that, this sort of trust deficit. There is still this element of organizations not necessarily trusting the systems per se. And so we need to build that trust inside organizations so that AI can be deployed safely and securely, and that organizations and employees can feel safe that they're using systems that they can trust. And then lastly, and I know we'll probably touch on this as we go through it, but there's clearly a data deficit or a data gap inside organizations as well, primarily around how do you take more of the enterprise-wide data that's been trapped inside organizations to really add that differentiator when companies are building solutions to deliver to their customers.
That makes sense. And I guess this all becomes more critical from a networking point of view as we move from the chatbots we will become very familiar with and sometimes slightly annoyed about to more agentic and autonomous agents. So can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, this is a really interesting space because we're seeing this sort of move from, I'd call AI assistants. We've all been used to using now AI assistants in our sort of day-to-day work. They're embedded in most applications you get from organizations today. There'll be an assistant inside an application that you're using in your organization to support you from a productivity perspective. But we're seeing this shift towards agentic AI and agents really taking on tasks on our behalf and going off and doing them. And there's sort of a difference when that happens. And as we've started to see organizations deploy agents, think about what happens when you have a discussion with an AI chatbot or an AI assistant. It's a transactional. You send a request, the assistant goes off, does a bit of work, there's a bit of network traffic that gets created as a result of that, you get a response back. And it's sort of spiky traffic, if you like. When you've got agents in your environment, suddenly there's a continuous amount of traffic. They're off doing that piece of work, but they are interacting with other agents, other systems. Agents don't take holidays. They're not taking time off at lunch either. And so they're on and they're persistent. And so this creates this persistent traffic level on networks. And that's part of the reason why that infrastructure deficit comes into play. Organizations need to upgrade their infrastructure and their networking to accommodate this sort of increased bandwidth and traffic patterns, which are going to result as AI agents become more deployed across organizations. But also from a thematic perspective, what are you seeing in the industry as to how this is playing out?
I think when we have to treating agents just like we treat employees, there becomes issues around identification and access management for those agents. As you said, they don't have lunch breaks, They don't have holidays. That's one thing. I think we're seeing in the tech industry, we'd love to have phrases that end in ops. So we're seeing agent ops become a thing. We've had ML ops and DevOps, and I think that's definitely becoming a real thing. And some of the stuff you were talking about, the network, we're seeing just so much more focus on inference from an infrastructure point of view and what it means for organizations. So inference obviously being where AI delivers value versus all the training we've been thinking about for the last, really since obviously ChatGPT was launched. But the high cost of training is still there, but there's a lot more focus on inference. And as you were talking about earlier, the importance that some of the organizations might find the infrastructure they have isn't really ready for that.
Yeah.
And one other thing I think we're going to touch on as well is the sovereign AI issue, which is becoming so prevalent in every country around the world. And I think where organizations want to have more control over not only their data, but all their entire technical operations. It's not just about data residency, although that is a key part. It's also about this idea of control.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think the couple of pieces that you mentioned there, one around identity. I'd say identity is becoming the new perimeter for organizations. And, I think the identity of devices, the identity of people, things in the environment, but also now, as you say, this agentic workforce that's doing work on our behalf. What level of access should they have? How long should they have it access for? What's the audit trail? What do those interactions look like? And what human oversight is there in terms of what actions agents are doing on our behalf? And so we think of that as this notion of, how we can embed sort of security into the fabric of the infrastructure and into the network. And we think, given the network is probably is the most unique and common platform that connects all of these things. Everything touches that infrastructure and the network environment. So whether it's physical devices, whether it's the data center, whether it's your campus network, your different devices, but also all your digital assets and your digital workers as well. And so we think actually embedding security right into the workflow, into the infrastructure where that traffic happens, is also a big opportunity for organizations, because that's potentially where the biggest threat's going to come from as well, from a security perspective. And then, as you said, this thematic move towards more sovereign solutions and this notion of geopatriation of workloads, specifically as it relates to AI, is definitely something that's increasing across the EMEA region. And, companies are looking for solutions that are, deployable on-premise, deployable in an air-gapped fashion, that they can, apply software updates offline, that it's disconnected from cloud environments. And we're seeing that play out. And so, we're certainly investing a lot in delivering those types of solutions, especially as it relates to just general workloads, but also more importantly to AI, as organizations really think about their own data. Again, back to that point, it's trapped inside their organizations, and they want to do something with it, but they don't necessarily want to put that in a public cloud environment.
Yeah, it's amazing how the conversation has changed over the last really year or two about, no, it's not all going to the public cloud. It never really was. We all kind of knew that. But it's becoming, we're hearing so many organizations talk about repatriation for sovereign reasons and security reasons. And it's not just the most kind of paranoid organization. It's becoming much more prevalent. So with all these kind of exceptionally increased workloads, what's the role of silicon in all this? Could you, I know you have custom silicon at Cisco. So considering the growing concerns around energy efficiency and sustainability, could you talk about the role of silicon?
Yes, I mean, silicon plays a huge role. At Cisco, we're very proud of the fact that we've got a full lineup of silicon technology across our portfolio. We've been investing in this for a number of years, and so it plays a really important part in terms of helping us, both help our largest hyperscaler customers build out their AI data center fabrics, and that programmability that Silicon One, which is what we offer, really gives our customers, allows them to build the largest scalable systems for those big AI training workloads. And Silicon One being programmable is probably one of its biggest differentiators and being extremely power efficient. It's, we're seeing this shift as these AI clusters grow. That the demands being placed on the infrastructure is changing. And primarily, we talk about infrastructure constraint, but power is obviously a big constraint. If you take the early GPT models, they were trained on maybe about 100 to 200 GPUs. You're looking at now the latest models being trained on anything from 50 to 100,000 GPUs. You're getting to the state where now there's physical constraints in terms of what capacity you can build from a building data center perspective, physical sort of real estate and power. And the analogy I'll use is in the same way that, animals migrate towards water when there's a shortage, data centers are migrating to where the power is when there's power shortage. And so, we're starting to see this sort of big data center migration to places where power is perhaps more readily available. But even then, you're getting to a point where, the physical constraints of the size of the data center are a challenge. And so, we've been really aware of this sort of shift happening and really focused on thinking about how we both build silicon for scale-up networking, which is inside a rack, inside a data center, a scale-out across racks inside a data center. We're certainly starting to build that capacity now. And then what do we do as these data centers separate and organizations are now starting to build multiple data centers that need to be networked together. And that requires a different sort of data center interconnect, and we're calling that scale across networking. So our Cisco P200 chip is really focused on that, because as you bring these AI data centers together across large, expansive environments, you suddenly hit different types of bottlenecks in terms of how you interconnect them through optical networking and coherent pluggable optics. You need deep buffering technology because the distances are larger. AI training, if you lose any packet, that's a lot of money. So, actually making sure you have consistency and performance across these sort of scale across environments is important. So we're seeing a lot happening there, but also sort of shifting towards the edge as well. So, we're seeing, whilst there's the large sort of AI cluster development, you mentioned the sort of move towards inference. We're certainly seeing this shift towards inference towards the edge, and smaller language models being deployed on data that's being produced at the edge in a factory floor by devices that are sitting on a production line, for example. So, I'd be interested in getting your thoughts on that as well, as to how you see that playing out.
Yeah, that smaller language model point is crucial. Certainly one of the things we're looking at closely is it's a hybrid world of in all sorts of the meanings of the word, isn't it? It's hybrid in terms of cloud and on-prem, but it's also hybrid in terms of large language models and small language domain-specific models.
Yes.
Yeah, we're seeing so much more interested in that. And it's not just via cloud APIs, it's open source models, obviously on devices and on-prem. Yeah. And I think that's one of the key trends we're looking at, I'm looking at this year.
Yeah, and I think linked to that, as companies start to deploy these sort of domain-specific models, smaller models, more customized, we're seeing this sort of shift towards AI security becoming now, a bigger area for customers to really look at and organizations really thinking about. If you think about the power of AI now, and if you're going to defend yourself at machine scale, you're going to really need to rethink your posture and how you actually protect against these environments. And so, solutions to actually look at what type of AI usage is going on across your system, actually scanning models that are being used for poisoning and hallucination. Have you verified what's happening there as we use model context protocol to integrate all of these different systems together? How do you know that the right access levels are being
MCP servers everywhere.
Exactly. So there's a real challenge there. So really making sure you've got visibility in many ways. Like we had shadow IT, we had shadow cloud, we've now got shadow AI, and having visibility into what organizations are using today and being able to manage that and protect your intellectual property is really important.
So we've been talking about how AI touches everything we do, both from an enterprise point of view, but also from the end users. But a key thing, there's still a lot of skeptics out there. We see them in not only in the consumer space, but in the enterprise space, becoming less so, I think, over the last few years. But trust and building that trust and proving that trust is such a crucial element. So how does Cisco help organizations do that?
Yeah, I think it's multi-leveled, because I think that at a technology level, you've got to make systems that are trustworthy, safe, transparent, that you're respecting privacy, regulation. And, we have a very robust system for making sure our products, meet our AI governance guidelines across the portfolio, and very transparent about what we do and where we use it, and making sure we're not training on customer data, for example, and we're using synthetic data to make that happen. Just an example. I think also for organizations, this is more than just the technology. We're kind of seeing this notion of we need a human systems upgrade to actually help users in organizations feel comfortable with the technology and how it can actually help them drive productivity. And, often there's we hear the sort of adage around, AI taking jobs. I think we sort of almost need to reframe the question around, are we actually redesigning the sort of workflows we have in our organizations to support AI in one way, shape or form, and really helping employees with, the new skill sets they're going to need to be managing agents, and having them as co-workers and digital co-workers, if not for a better word, in an organization. So I think there's a lot that organizations can do to remove some of the angst and the worry by driving training and capability development, but also rethinking some of the processes so that we're designing the environment that's more conducive to allow this sort of human to agent interaction.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing it's easier in a much smaller company, from an enterprise. If you're not an enterprise, you're a small business, to actually bring agents into play very quickly, isn't it? But it's another thing if you're 10, 20, 50,000 people. to be able to, to reorganize your workflows and, keep that trust level, keep the security levels. So, I think that's, in some ways, enterprises are going to be able to learn from, the small early adopters. And we're at Futurum, we're not a very large company, but we're certainly using agents already, pretty widely. And I think they say it's a lot easier to do it if you've only got 100 or 150 people.
And I think to that point, I think you've got to pick a use case, and it is very much use case driven. So if I look at our organization, we're using it heavily in our customer experience organization in terms of how we interact with customers and faster resolution to problems and customer support, which is hugely important. If we look at our developers and our engineers, using coding agents to actually support us from that perspective, we're already seeing huge benefit there in terms of how much we can drive, and in some cases we're seeing up to 1,500 hours of savings for engineer development time a month by using some of this technology. So there are practical benefits to it, and I think it's the driving adoption across organizations is going to be hugely important because it's such a transformative technology.
Exactly. Transforming work rather than replacing it, isn't it? So we both touched on sovereignty a little bit earlier. Can we dig into what Cisco offers enterprises in terms of sovereign infrastructure and how you enable them to get that control?
Absolutely. I mean, it's a huge area for customers across the region. We've made a big investment in making sure that we can deliver technology that meets what customers are trying to do at their point of deployment. So, in many cases, that is shifting workloads to on-premise again, making sure that some of these systems are air-gapped and available to do things like software updates offline, having local support and engineers in country, for example, where regulation dictates that, and really making sure all of our processes internally allow customers to do that.
I don't know if this is the case or not, but obviously Europe and EMEA is kind of the home of sovereign, isn't it? I don't know if Cisco's had any learning sort of emanating from Europe into the rest of the world. How does Cisco look upon the geographies in terms of sovereignty, or is it just a global thing?
I think it's a global thing. It's happening in different parts of the world at sort of different pace. Clearly, some countries across Europe are more advanced in terms of what the requirements are, and the regulation dictates that. But there's also a balance to be had. I think companies know they're operating in a global environment. Certainly when it comes to AI and where the data sits, that's probably one of the big driving factors, because AI is only as good as the data you feed it, and most of that data is sitting inside organizations, and so that's the intellectual property they want to protect, train their models on and run them locally, because it's going to be far more cost effective and to deliver the services as a result of that.
So we've touched a lot of things today. Is there anything else you think organizations in Europe should have on their radar?
Oh, there's a lot of things. I think, at least from an outlook perspective for this year, there's so much progress happening in quantum. At some point in time over the next few years, there will be a ChatGPT type moment for quantum, but we're seeing continuous progression on the capabilities from a computing perspective. And we're spending a lot of time working on that because we know, there are threats associated with quantum in terms of breaking current encryption. As those quantum computers get more powerful, then, our cryptographic algorithms that exist today to protect all of our communications, could be at threat. And certainly attackers aren't waiting. They're using this sort of notion of harvest now, decrypt later. And so actually getting ready and protecting your infrastructure, your communications, your data today, the industry's moving towards using post-quantum cryptography and algorithms that protect against that. And we're certainly embedding that into the infrastructure, into our networking products, because again, that touches all infrastructure and all communications today. But then we're also working on, with partnerships and industry around, how do we get to more scalable quantum environments? Qubits are, like tokens are in AI, qubits are what is the currency in quantum. And again, we believe, it won't be large quantum computers. We think there'll be smaller quantum computers that will be networked together to deliver this capacity. And so we're very focused on quantum networking and quantum security associated with that. So I think that's one thing that IT leaders need to keep an eye on and start making sure they're getting ready their environments for. How about you? What's on your radar?
It's similar vein, I guess. Photonics might be one of the things, as we say, if we do start linking small quantum computers, but also to deal with some of today's issues we were talking about, where if the data centers are getting built where the power is, that doesn't necessarily serve the enterprise well, who might be thousands of miles away. So how do you speed up the networking? To make that more practical and more useful, really. So photonics would be one of the things. Neuromorphic computing. Yes. That's getting a bit far out there, isn't it? For 2026. But I think organisations in Europe, again, CTOs, CIOs should have just keep an eye on, but you don't have to worry necessarily today about it. But it's coming. So thanks, Chintan. It's been really interesting talking about the 2026 outlook for Europe from your perspective. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So just wrapping up here, so Chintan and I have been talking about a few key things. So the shift to agentic and what that does to the infrastructure underneath, the importance of inference as we move to where business value is realized from AI, sovereign AI, and finally the importance of security and embedding that into the infrastructure and the network fabric overall. So thanks very much for taking the time to listen to our 2026 outlook for EMEA.